from Parmesan cheese wheels that cost over $1,000 to traditional Brie, which could be in danger. We show you bucket list cheeses to try across Europe. Our first stop is La Latteria in London, where fresh mozzarella is made every day. One of the most beloved cheeses in Italian cuisine, mozzarella is though one of the most vulnerable. That's because it has a very short shelf life. It is best eaten the day of. You can stretch it possibly to a week, but no more. La Latteria makes fresh mozzarella here daily. They have a whole Italian team and expertise, and they use local milk to make their fresh mozzarella. We're going to meet with Simona. She's the founder and owner of the business, and she's going to talk us through how mozzarella is made, and then we're going to have, of course, a little tasting of all the different products that you can make with it. Let's go.
So we receive the milk 2 or 3 times a week. We only produce on order because our product, the entire mission is to have something which is authentic, natural, no additives. We don't have any stock of anything except a couple of products which have slightly longer shelf life. So our milk delivery are very much linked to our production. The process starts here. Workers heat milk and add rennet to form curds, which are placed on the stable to drain. The curd is cut and transferred to this machine, where it's shred, mixed, and kneaded. This process is standard in an artisanal dairy in Italy, but it's one of a kind here in London. This is where Simona's team's expertise comes in. We had to make some adjustments, obviously, but primarily because the milk is different, the water is different, the temperature is different. And so when you get into artisanal production, which is not machine or computer-driven, but human-driven, you need to adjust. So the milk, obviously, you need then an expert cheesemaker that can adjust to a different level of fatness or creaminess or richness.
Once the cheese is ready, workers mold it into a variety of shapes. Mozzarella balls, mozzarella knots, and long strips. Another machine shreds the long strips and mixes them with cream to make stracciatella. This is pumped into the center of mozzarella balls to create burrata. The curd we saw being shaped into mozzarella is just one end product. When split, milk separates into curd and whey. The whey is then used to make ricotta cheese.
Once the two of them are separated, we move the whey into another pot and we reboil it. Ricotta in Italian means recooked. This is actually, I would say, the leftover of the production in the sense, but it looks pretty much the same. It's just now this has been depleted of all the major protein and casein, which is what creates a ricotta.
When we start, usually we start from the ricotta to make sure that you don't cover a stronger taste while you move to the more delicate one. And as you can see, it's very creamy.
So rich.
And it's very rich in flavor. Then you have the stracciatella. This is nothing else but a string of the same mozzarella mixed with cream, with tea, and salt.
Okay. It reminds me a bit of the ricotta in terms of the creaminess, but then the flavors are weirdly even more delicate because you've got that cream, the sweetness of the cream. As an Italian living abroad, it's the first time that I have mozzarella this fresh. I feel like at home. I mean, it's cold. It is really cool. It's like 0 degrees today, so that's an indication that we're not in Italy, but it's apart from that, the flavor is incredible. Our next cheese is one that could be endangered. We traveled to New Zealand to learn more about Brie.
This cheese is being stabbed, so molds can grow inside.
Without molds, we'd have a very bland cheese world.
But an important slice of this world could be in danger. All of the globe's Brie and its funkier cousin Camembert relies on one strain of white mold called Penicillium camemberti.
It has been cloned for over a century.
But now some French scientists say it could be on the verge of extinction, putting an industry worth billions at risk.
It's crazy risky that we've got one ingredient going and producing all this cheese. We're on a bit of a panic mode that what are we going to do as a replacement?
But finding a replacement mold in the wild would be really hard.
Literally a needle in the haystack.
So why is the iconic white mold at risk of dying? And what does this mean for cheese lovers around the world? Many cheesemakers globally get their Penicillium camemberti mold freeze-dried from labs in France. This includes Simon Barry, who runs the Whitestone Cheese Company in Oamaru, New Zealand, which has specialized in artisan cheese for nearly 40 years. He pays $50 for this dose of mold, which will give him 240 large wheels of brie. Simon's team starts its brie out just like any other cheese, with a big vat of warm milk. They inoculate it with mold at this stage.
We rely on molds to give us all this flavor and all this creativity.
Cheeses injected with mold, like Camembert and Gorgonzola, tend to have more pungent and complex flavors than those made without it, like mozzarella or cheddar. Moldy cheeses can also be more expensive.
They got their own personalities, they're their own wee stars in themselves.
No matter the mold content, cheesemakers add rennet to curdle the milk, separating it into solid curds and liquid whey.
It's going to turn as almost like a custard texture.
They dip in this giant knife to cut it in one direction and then the other. They still do this part by hand so they can feel how the curds are developing. They want them to be about the size of a die.
The inside is still slightly gooey and shiny.
This is one of the only automated steps in the process. The machine can lift nearly 500 pounds of curds and tip them over the ring molds. Workers move as fast as they can to fill each one by hand. The company donates all the liquid that drains out to local farms for animal feed. The team can make over 8,000 mini brie wheels a day. These rounds will chill in the fridge for 24 hours so gravity can start knitting those curds together. Once they've removed the ring molds, workers flip the wheels twice a week to make sure the fungi can begin growing evenly on the outside. After 12 days, they submerge both the small and big brie wheels in a saltwater bath.
Probably not quite as salty as the Dead Sea, but we add salt to it twice a week.
That brine adds flavor and serves as a natural preservative. Finally, these wheels head to the aging room.
So they're kept at around 10 to 12 degrees, which is the optimal temperature for growing the mold.
This is where the mold does its best work. In just 2 weeks, the Penicillium camemberti creates a fluffy layer on the outside and turns the inside sweet. At this point, workers package up the rounds. They'll cut the big wheels with wire and wrap the triangles in wax paper, which helps the cheese stay dry, so it'll keep longer. Smaller rounds are packed in another room using this machine. But no matter the size, each wheel ends up being creamy, mild, and buttery, with a slight funk. It's that flavor that made Penicillium camemberti a global sensation to begin with. Humans used to make cheese from a variety of wild molds, but over the centuries they domesticated them, similar to how a wild grain, after many generations of breeding, was turned into the corn we eat today. They started by manipulating the environment, like placing the cheese in damp caves or aging it on different kinds of wood, eventually figuring out which molds were tasty and not toxic to eat.
You cannot domesticate in 1, 2, 3 generations. It really needs time to evolve, to adapt, to be domesticated.
Early versions of Brie and Camembert were very different from today. They could have been orange, gray, or even blue.
If you went to buy a Camembert wheel at a farmer's market in France, it'd be like 250 years ago, it would have been just like blue and kind of stinky, maybe smell like, a wet basement.
The problem was, there was a risk those early domesticated molds could reproduce and create toxic babies. In the late 1800s, French scientists found and isolated a very rare penicillium mold with a genetic mutation that made it albino. They called it Penicillium camemberti. It made cheese that was creamy, tangy, and pretty, and people loved it. It also grew quickly and made consistent batches of non-toxic cheese. Soon, cheesemakers across France and the world started going all in on this new mold. But what made it so popular could also be its demise.
There is no genetic diversity within Penicillium camemberti.
For the past 7 years, Jean Ropas has been researching how cheese molds adapt for the French National Center for Scientific Research outside Paris. And in 2024, it was her lab that sounded the alarm that Penicillium camemberti could be on the verge of extinction. The mold has another genetic mutation that makes it reproduce asexually. To replicate on cheese crusts, it releases spores that are genetic copies of their parents, aka clones. After over a century of cloning, Penicillium camemberti is producing fewer spores than it used to.
If you don't have spores, it's difficult, even for the cheese producers, to have a good amount of penicillium to sell it.
And Jeanne worries more cloning will only cause more bad mutations.
After a long time, the generation is causing this. Diversity and sexual reproduction is necessary for survival.
It's also really unlikely we would find another Penicillium camemberti in the wild. It developed that white color likely because it was growing in a dark cheese cave, but that also leaves it with very little protection.
The blue color of the ancestral mold is almost like a sunscreen. It protects it from the stress of UV light.
The lack of genetic diversity makes it susceptible to pests too. A disease could quickly wipe out the whole strain.
Survival of the fittest would not work out for it because it's not fit.
You can say, we don't care because it's on the cheese. It's more big than just mold in the entire world. We are losing biodiversity.
Many industries rely on limited crop variety, allowing for the quick spread of disease, like oranges, kiwis, and the most popular banana in the world, the Cavendish. It has been cloned for decades, but now a deadly fungus is decimating the trees globally because there's no resistance. And scientists are now rushing to find new varieties that can resist the disease. While there aren't any diseases threatening Penicillium camemberti mold now, its vulnerability is really concerning to producers.
Nervous because, you know, if you go to order your mold and it's not going to turn up, well, what are you going to do?
Oui, je suis concerné par l'avenir du camembert complètement, ouais.
Charles Briand is a third-generation cheesemaker in Normandy, France. He's spent years perfecting his camembert recipe, which he now sells under the label Le Cinq Frères. And he loves what Penicillium camemberti does to the cheese.
Elle vieillit et après le fromage il devient un petit peu marron sur les arêtes, sur le tour, et le fromage est aussi crémeux.
He makes his camembert the traditional way, with unpasteurized milk.
Dès que j'ai le lait, c'est le moment où j'ensemence le lait.
His process is steeped in tradition. For one, he still ladles the curds into molds by hand, just like cheesemakers have for centuries. His team does this process 5 times, waiting an hour in between for the liquid to drain.
On ne peut pas faire les 5 fois en même temps parce qu'il n'y a pas assez de place dans les moules pour verser les 5 louches d'une seule fois.
As it ages,
On peut dire que ça moutonne.
with 4 of his brothers also in the business, there's a lot at stake if his white mold goes extinct. France is the birthplace of Brie and Camembert, and a top producer globally, so it could be hit hard if there's a mold meltdown.
Tous les producteurs de camembert seraient ou seront concernés, donc ce sera un changement global.
But Charles doesn't have the time to find a new mold to replace Camemberti. And even if he did, it would cost him a lot of money to figure out how to work with it.
Mais il faut beaucoup de temps parce qu'il faut faire beaucoup d'essais. Je suis quand même fermier, je suis pas, j'ai pas une grosse équipe, je suis tout seul.
And he says French consumers might have a hard time giving up that taste.
Parce que produire c'est très bien, faire un beau fromage, mais il faut réussir à le vendre derrière. Traditionnel. Nous, en France, les gens, ils ont une certaine habitude. Et par contre, si on est en Nouvelle-Zélande, je pense que les clients, ils n'ont pas forcément l'habitude d'avoir du camembert. Donc, si on leur présente une nouvelle forme, ce sera moins gênant, c'est sûr. À moins que ce soit des Français qui habitent en Nouvelle-Zélande, et là, ça va pas aller.
Simon has seen just that, an appetite among New Zealand consumers to try new cheeses.
When I was a kid, cheese was the 1 kg block of cheddar or Colby. The range available now in New Zealand of all these different flavour profiles is significantly changed.
All this demand has allowed him to experiment. And that's how he came across a new kind of blue mold the world had never tasted before. It was discovered on a hay bale on a farm 2 hours away.
The hay bale was also wrapped, and that kept the moisture in there. At high altitudes, it would have been cold, and a very similar environment to a blue cheese in its cave.
Whitestone says this is probably one of the only non-toxic molds found in the wild and commercialized in recent decades. Simon had to get permission from the government to start making cheese with it and prove with lab tests that it was safe to eat.
At first, they were like, "What are you guys doing? This is mad." And then they saw the light.
Once he got approval, it still took the team 6 months to figure out how to work with it.
The first cheeses we made, we went into the maturation room and you picked them up and it was like a powder.
Whitestone named the cheese Shenley Station Blue after the farm where the mold was found. Unlike Brie, these rounds don't get a brine bath. Workers punch the wheels out of their ring molds and roll them in salt by hand. This makes it easier to control the salt levels. Too much and the cheese might taste too bitter. Also, they can't put these in the same bath as the white cheeses because they don't want to cross-contaminate the molds. Mixing molds could create unpredictable flavors that they don't want. This machine pierces the wheels so the blue mold can reach inside.
Piercing feeds oxygen, letting that blue mold grow and thrive in there with an oxygen feed.
The team stores the blue cheese at 48 degrees Fahrenheit in a separate aging room to keep the two molds apart. Just like Brie, the Shenley Station Blue will get sweeter as it ages, but instead of creamy, it turns crumbly.
It gets firmer, so it's drying out over time. It's a lovely little environment for that blue mold to grow and develop flavour. We turn these cheeses by hand twice a week, keep them round, keep the circular.
After up to 6 months, the wheels are ready for packing. This device slices the big wheels in half, and then into wedges. Then workers drop them on the packaging line, and New Zealand consumers have loved it.
We can barely keep up with demand in terms of capacity.
Simon sells his wedges of Shenley Station Blue for nearly double the price of a slice of Brie.
It's a mild flavour. It melts beautifully into pasta sauces, and as a cooking cheese, it is sensational.
He hopes his story can send a message to Brie producers around the world. Go look for new molds.
Like the Indiana Jones of cheese.
But finding a new white mold could be much harder.
So white molds are not really present in the wild.
In her lab outside of Paris, Jeanne collects cheese crusts from around the world, searching for mold diversity.
Where did this crust come from? People just gave me crusts.
First, she'll swab the mold. Then she'll isolate it on a petri dish and study it under a microscope.
When you compare like more natural cheeses, you can see that you have a diversity in terms of molds and fungi on the crust compared to something which is more industrial when it's all the same, all beautifully white.
She sequences the mold's DNA to learn how they've adapted over time. She thinks a fix for our overdependence on just one white mold lies with an ancestor to Camembert tea, Penicillium biforme. That could have been what made the Brie blue hundreds of years ago.
There is a huge diversity in terms of colors, also in terms of genetics for sure.
It's more common in the wild, and it has that blue color for sunscreen. Jeanne has already isolated a few biforme samples in her lab.
And here are biforme strains on cheese again. And you can see that they are different, but you cannot really see it here. All these ones are biforme.
But to use it for cheese production, scientists need to find a strain that's consistent and safe to eat.
So they actually make this thing called cyclopyazonic acid, which can be toxic to humans. Obviously, you don't want to be making camembert that's toxic to people. So we're going to have to do really careful work to check these strains, if we do use them for cheese making, to make sure that they aren't producing any toxins or anything that's not great for human consumption.
Maybe then, we can find a mold that will have a fighting chance against any future diseases or mutations.
I'm excited to think that we could have our own strain, that we're not reliant on bringing in an import ingredient and saying, here's our one, this is how it tastes, and this is how we do it.
And maybe we can find a cheese the world has never tasted before.
Next, we head over to the Italian regions of Piedmont and Lombardy to see how Gorgonzola cheese is made. There are only 29 dairies in the world certified to produce this cheese. Hi guys, this is Claudia, and today I'm gonna take you to see how Gorgonzola cheese is made in Italy. I'm in Trecate in the Piedmont region, which is one of the only two Italian regions together with Lombardy where this cheese can be made. And this is one of the only 29 dairies in the world that can produce this cheese. The Gorgonzola industry is worth over $800 million. Almost 5 million wheels are produced each year, and production is confined to this small area only. Gorgonzola cheese has a centuries-old history, and it is still done using the same ingredients and techniques that it was decades ago. Even machines like this one, used to stir the curd, are designed to recreate human movements as gently as possible. Its beautiful marbled interior is given by Penicillium roqueforti, a fungus that is used to ripen the cheese. And this is why, in fact, blue cheese is called so.
Innanzitutto il gorgonzola è un formaggio che è nato in Valsassina, quindi è un formaggio che nasce sulle Alpi. Le famiglie di bergamini, cioè che erano quelli come i pastori e fanno con le pecore, i bergamini lo facevano con le vacche, quindi portavano le vacche al pascolo sostanzialmente. La mia famiglia è una famiglia bergamina, è da queste famiglie che hanno iniziato a trasformare quel latte che raccoglievano in formaggi. Nel nostro caso hanno fatto formaggio arborinato, quindi in che modo? Facendolo sostanzialmente dopo aver fatto il formaggio veniva lasciato stagionare in queste che anticamente erano degli incavi naturali, quindi delle grotte naturali. Poi sono state delle casere, che erano delle costruzioni proprio particolari che andavano sottoterra in Valsassina. Poi successivamente tutti i produttori, i maggiori produttori di gorgonzola, per diciamo necessità economica del tempo, perché comunque le stalle nella pianura padana si erano sviluppate, quindi il commercio era aumentato, si sono spostati in pianura padana.
Gorgonzola cheese is made with unskimmed, pasteurized cow's milk, and it can either be mild and creamy or hard and pungent, depending on how long it is left to age. The two kinds are easily distinguishable by the color of their veins, blue in the creamy and green in the pungent.
Il gorgonzola e quindi anche i formaggi blu sono, per noi sono un formaggio molto particolare, trasversale, perché non è né un formaggio molle né un formaggio stagionato, cioè è tutte e due le cose. In più c'è la variante della muffa blu, del Penicillium roqueforti, che è un altro, diciamo, apportatore di sapore e di differenze, quindi è un formaggio che ha molte strutture, oltre che visive, cioè anche visivamente è molto bello.
Penicillium roqueforti, the fungus, is added to milk at the very beginning of the production process, in a big cauldron together with enzymes, rennet and yeast. In about 20 minutes, milk becomes curd and can be transferred into molds. Each wheel is marked with the dairy's identification number. You can see number 60 here. That's Caseificio C in Vernizzi we visited. Here, between 450 and 500 gorgonzola wheels are made every day. To help the curd settle, wheels are turned 4 times and then left to rest overnight. Then they are salted a couple of times. At this stage, they weigh about 18 kilos, that's 40 pounds, but this number will drop to 12 kilos, 26 pounds,
at the end of the aging process as excess whey is released. The salting rooms are warm and humid. This is also to favor the activity of yeasts inside the cheese. Mild Gorgonzola wheels stay for 3 days and hard Gorgonzola for 5. Then they are moved again into a cold room, where they are punctured 100 times on each side. This is to allow oxygen into the cheese for it to grow its signature blue veins. All Gorgonzolas at Caseificio C in Vernizzi are punctured with a machine, but some other in-house cheeses are still punctured by hand. After this step, the cheese is left to age. It takes 2 months for the blue, creamy Gorgonzola and 3 months for the green, pungent one. The color difference is pretty evident. But do they really taste different? The dairy set up a little cheese tasting so that we could try them both.
That's amazing, my God. It almost doesn't feel like, you're biting into cheese. It just melts in your mouth. Oh wow. They're so different, it's crazy, I mean, you can tell from the texture that this is harder and this is creamier, but this is much, much stronger. It has a stronger bite.
After trying Gorgonzola on its own, in-house chef Giampiero Cravero wanted to show me how versatile the cheese is, so he cooked some squid spaghetti with both cheeses.
Io basta.
Wow, cheese taste is very strong, but I think the combination with the squid ink is great. I mean, color-wise, of course, it's amazing because black and white, they're like opposite, right? So you can really see the cheese in there and it's sort of creamy texture on the pasta.
Gorgonzola cheese is protected by the European Union by the Protected Designation of Origin scheme. This means that any cheese labeled Gorgonzola must meet a particular set of standards and is subject to quality checks. It's also wrapped in a signature aluminium foil.
Devi essere un caseificio che nasce in questo territorio, cioè genericamente tra Novara e Bergamo. Questo è il territorio consentito, quindi deve essere un caseificio che nasce, che sta in quel territorio, che raccoglie il latte da quel territorio. Infatti noi lo raccogliamo, il nostro latte viene da Magenta, che qui ha 7 km. Tutte le stalle da cui raccogli il latte devono essere certificate per la produzione di Gorgonzola. Devi rispettare tutti gli standard che richiede il consorzio. Avrai un numero di casello che tu dovrai imprimere sulle tue forme nel caseificio appena sono state prodotte e oltre a rispettare i giorni di stagionatura, ad esempio, avrai anche da mettere sulla forma finale, quando sarà stata stagionata completamente, l'alluminio goffrato. Questo è il modo in cui puoi essere tutelato e un produttore deve seguire per fare il Gorgonzola DOP, che nella maggior parte dei casi sono comunque delle famiglie storiche che l'hanno sempre prodotto e quindi si sono originate in questi territori.
Our next cheese is Parmesan, and it's quite expensive.
A wheel of Parmesan cheese can cost over $1,000. The average wheel weighs 88 pounds, which means it costs over $11 per pound. That might not sound like a lot, but it's more than double the price of your average cheddar. A wheel of Parmesan cheese takes at least 1 year to age, 131 gallons of milk to make, and it can only be made in a small area in northern Italy. Parmesan cheese is a big business for Italy. An average of 3.6 million wheels are produced each year, and the industry is worth an eye-popping 2.2 billion euros, that's about 2.5 billion US dollars, making this cheese one of Italy's biggest exports. Every single cheese wheel is made in a restricted area in northern Italy, in the region of Emilia-Romagna. Its Italian name, in fact, Parmigiano Reggiano, means from the cities of Parma and Reggio Emilia. So how does this turn into this? And what makes it so special? We went to a dairy in Parma, Italy, to find out. The very first producers of Parmesan cheese were monks over 1,000 years ago. Then, like now, Parmesan wheels were made with only 3 ingredients: cow milk, salt, and rennet. There are only 329 dairies in the whole world that are certified to produce Parmesan cheese, and they are all based in the same area where the monks used to make it. In fact, it isn't even possible to make the exact same product outside of the production area. And why is that? Turns out, it's all about 3 good bacteria that only grow in this specific territory.
Tutta la logica nella filiera di produzione del Parmigiano Reggiano è trasferire questi batteri dall'erba alla forma di conservazione dell'erba, il fieno, dal fieno alla mangiatoia, dalla mangiatoia attraverso le tecniche di allevamento degli animali al latte, e una volta che sono nel latte, nel casificio, si cerca di farli crescere per permettere la loro presenza dentro la forma del Parmigiano Reggiano. Se loro ci sono, fermentano le componenti del latte negli aromi, profumi e sapori tipici del Parmigiano.
It takes 131 gallons of milk to make 1 wheel of Parmesan cheese. That's whole low milk. Dairies combine freshly milked whole milk with day-old skim milk to make the cheese. The 2 milks are transferred in these copper vats along with fermented whey, a sort of sourdough, and then rennet, an enzyme which gives the milk a yogurt-like texture. The cheese master will then split the milk into curds using this tool called spino.
Il casaro deve trasformare questa consistenza in una consistenza più gommosa, perché dobbiamo togliere acqua, visto che dobbiamo fare un formaggio a lunga stagionatura. E inizia quindi la fase della cottura, e in 5 minuti si passa dalla temperatura di 38 gradi centigradi a 55 gradi centigradi.
Together with changing the cheese texture, cooking the milk does another essential job. Do you remember the 3 good bacteria? Well, they're not alone. Other bacteria, bad bacteria, might have joined the party. Cooking the milk ensures that only the good bacteria can continue the journey, while the others are kicked out. When cooked, the curd travels all the way to the bottom of the vat, where it's left to settle. 45 minutes later, here it is, a compact mass of curd, weighing 220 pounds. This mass is the equivalent of 2 cheese wheels and is split carefully by workers with linen clothes. Each half is then transferred into molds.
2 ore questo telo viene cambiato e l'operazione è: si toglie il peso sopra questa massa, si cambia il telo, si gira la forma. Questo ogni 2 ore fino alla sera, alle ore 20.
At 8 p.m., the cheese is covered with this stencil, which will engrave the logo Parmigiano Reggiano. These dots are the mark of origin used to tell customers that this is the real thing, made in the same restricted area where monks used to live in the Middle Ages. Each wheel is also given an ID. It's this plaque, made from milk protein, which contains information about where it was produced and when. The stencil is removed 4 days later, and the wheels are pressed into brines, where they stay completely plunged for about 19 days. This process helps to form the cheese rind, which acts as a barrier for the cheese. And this is when the maturation process begins. Wheels remain relatively untouched for 1 year. After that, a master grader will inspect them and brand them. The average maturation is 2 years, but some wheels are aged as long as 10 years to achieve a stronger, nuttier taste. A longer maturation period makes the price go higher. That's why a Stravecchio, very old Parmesan, that has matured for 3 years will be sold on the market for an average of 13 euros. That's about $15 per pound. This high price means that there is now a black market of counterfeit Parmesan products. Italy has been struggling with fake products for years. In fact, the problem is so big that the fakes have become an industry of their own that is estimated to be worth 100 billion euros. That's about 113 billion US dollars, with Parmigiano Reggiano being one of the biggest brands fighting copycats. While the cheese is protected in the European Union under the Protected Designation of Origin scheme, it is still struggling to get the recognition it deserves in the rest of the world.
Fuori l'Unione Europea e fuori quei paesi che non fanno parte di accordi bilaterali dove quindi viene riconosciuta la normativa europea, il problema è veramente molto grande, il problema è veramente molto serio. Infatti, al di là di poter proteggere il termine Parmigiano Reggiano attraverso un'operazione di deposito del marchio, in tanti paesi, in quasi tutti i paesi del mondo, il termine Parmigiano Reggiano è un trademark, però è possibile utilizzare in tanti paesi del mondo il termine Parmesan, quindi mettendo in confusione il consumatore finale che pensa di acquistare il vero Parmigiano Reggiano acquistando un Parmesan. Lì il problema è veramente molto grande e si sta lavorando a livello governativo.
So, how do you recognize a real Parmesan cheese? Do you remember this dotted stencil? That's a solid indication that the cheese is legit. If that's not visible, the packaging should contain Parmigiano Reggiano's official logo and the EU's Protected Designation of Origin.
This next cheese is one of Italy's rarest. This specific type of Caciocavallo is made with the raw milk of Podolica cows.
We're in San Nicandro Garganico, Italy, and today we're going to see how Caciocavallo cheese is made. Caciocavallo is one of the most popular cheeses here in southern Italy, and it's famous for its elongated shape. What we're going to see today is a special kind of Caciocavallo, the Podolico kind, which is made with the raw milk of Podolica cattle, a rare breed of cattle that is able to survive in the harshest conditions that we can find here. These conditions make their cheese one of the most expensive in Italy, sometimes even more expensive than the finest of Parmesans. Let's go find out more.
The Podolica cows that make this seaside cheese scatter all over as they roam, making it hard to tell that you're actually on a farm. Meet Virginio, one of only a handful of producers making the cheese we are here to learn about. He uses a recipe that his grandparents taught him, though the most important element of this recipe is location. Here in San Nicandro Garganico, we are only 1 kilometer from the sea and 100 meters above sea level. This is an important detail, and we'll soon know why.
E qui ci troviamo quasi vicino al mare, vicino a due laghi di acqua salata, insomma, famosi qui.
Qua ci troviamo tra il lago di Lesina e Varano.
Ed influisce un po' la presenza di questi laghi?
Sì, influisce perché tu hai praticamente tutti i microelementi li troviamo nel microambiente, calcio, iodio, magnesio, abbiamo tutto a disposizione, quindi non abbiamo bisogno di integrazioni alimentari.
The Podolica produce only 3 to 6 liters of milk a day, which is much less than the 30 liters an average cow might produce. Today, we're working with 50 liters. The environment in which the cows feed gives this milk a rich, earthy flavor. The whole cheese-making process takes 5 hours. Virginio heats up the milk to 40 degrees, enough to warm it up but still keep it raw, which is essential to make this type of Caciocavallo. If the milk were to become too warm, it would scorch and kill off the unique flavor that the Podolica cow's milk brings to this special cheese. He then adds rennet and fermented whey from yesterday's production, and after 20 minutes he starts cutting the curd. He aims for the size of a grain of rice. To do that, he uses this mushroom-looking tool which is called menaturo, a word that, as you might have guessed, comes from the local dialect.
Ma come mai ha questa forma a fungo?
In pratica perché agevola la rottura della cagliata.
Ah, ok. Però tutti gli altri strumenti che ho visto per tagliare altri formaggi hanno tipo delle reti, insomma.
Anche dell'attrezzatura.
Ah, ok. Quindi questo anziché, diciamo, essere a rete, a grata, è più uniforme.
Guarda, sì, è un pezzo di olivastro all'esterno e più un bastone di qualsiasi tipo.
Quindi questo è lo strumento tradizionale per il Caciocavallo.
Rather than slowly cutting the curd, to make Caciocavallo, Virginio energetically slashes through it. This breaks it up into the small pieces he's hoping to achieve. We are used to seeing curd being extracted and then shipped into cheese right away, but here he actually rests further with some of its own warm whey to allow for more concentrated flavor to develop. Keeping the curd nice and warm will facilitate its fermentation. While some other cheesemakers might use a steel vat for this process, here Virginio uses a maple vat to ferment the cheese. This also impacts the flavor, adding notes of acidity that tickle your tongue as you eat. Virginio tells us this takes about 1 hour, but because it's winter, we ended up waiting for 3 hours instead. The curd is ready to be stretched. Virginio takes out a bit of whey to keep as ferments for tomorrow. He then slices the curd in smaller parts, which will then be kneaded in hot water. In comparison to the stretched curd of mozzarella, this one will be harder. This is due to the waiting time as well as the size of the curd when it was cut.
Ma anche il sapore sarebbe diverso, perché quando la pasta è dura tu hai un formaggio stagionato più morbido, quando la pasta è morbida hai un formaggio stagionato più duro.
E quindi c'è più sapore nel formaggio perché è più concentrato
Quello umido
nella pasta.
In quello umido sì, perché tu riesci a conservare i sapori.
Invece nel formaggio, un formaggio più morbido come la mozzarella viene perso un po' nel latte, nell'acqua, sì. Anche un colore più giallino rispetto alla pasta che
È l'alimentazione degli animali.
Ah, quindi non dipende da quanto tempo è stata qui, ma
No,
proprio
no,
il colore del
questo
latte.
è solo il colore del latte, sì, sì.
Quindi il
Qua
latte
in
non
pratica
è...
tutti i beta-caroteni, tutti i principi nutritivi del pascolo verde li ritroviamo tutti quanti.
Quindi diciamo come regola base, se il latte è un po' più giallo vuol dire che ci sono più nutrienti.
Vai, più ricca di vitamine.
Sì, quindi l'immagine che noi abbiamo del latte bello bianco,
Sì.
in verità non è...
Scremato,
sì.
strascremato, cioè alla fine di latte ci rimane poco e niente.
Sì.
E comunque c'è un'omogenizzazione dei sapori. In pratica quando ero bambino avevo un'intolleranza al latte.
Ah, davvero? Proprio a te che fai i formaggi?
E allora praticamente dopo 1000 prove mio padre decise di darmi il latte vaccino. Quindi è da 8 giorni che bevo latte di Podolica.
Ah, da 8 giorni di vita praticamente. Ah, tu quindi bevi il latte
crudo?
Il latte crudo che abbiamo utilizzato qualche ora fa per fare questo.
Questo è il latte che consumo io.
Ah.
Forse per questo sono così legato a loro.
Eh sì, insomma ti ha salvato la vita perché letteralmente.
Virginio then adds some hot water to the curd. He will shape it into 2 cheeses, each weighing 2.5 kilos. This process will be done completely by hand, so let's get comfortable.
posto.
He tells me this water is 100 degrees, yes, Celsius, and judging by the color of his hands and the smoke around us, I don't envy him.
Sta belli caldi qua. Sembra di stare tutti attorno a un camino. Oh, è lunghissima, guarda. C'è un serpentone praticamente. Perché le due teste hanno una dimensione diversa?
Perché comunque la testa è la parte più salata, quindi in realtà non si mangia.
No, quella è la parte più buona. Avete gustibus, però...
La parte più buona è il cuore.
No, io sono una grande fan delle teste, dove c'è la buccia. Sono buone.
Each cheese goes through different shapes before reaching its final one. Virginio has his personal signature shape too. When Virginio is happy with the shape of the caciocavallo, he places it in cold water to set the shape and stop the fermentation. He then adds a rope around the cheese's heads to tie the pair together.
La caratteristica è che vanno in due?
Sì, la comunità del caciocavallo è che tu lo lasci assagionare senza doverlo girare e rigirare. Perché se tu hai un formaggio su un piano, tu ogni tanto sei costretto a girarlo per far asciugare tutte e due le facce omogeneamente.
È perché poi il peso di uno regge il peso dell'altro.
Certo,
sono due gemelli. Sì.
Once paired, the two cheeses move to bathe in brine. The time they spend here depends on weight. Every kilo needs 24 hours. These two new entries weigh 2.5 kilos, so they stay here for 60 hours. And when that time is over, their next destination is something unexpected.
Perché siamo fuori?
Questa è la mia prassi personale, io lo lascio per 2 ore qua ad asciugare sotto il mio albero portafortuna.
Sotto gli alberi.
Così il vento lo asciuga anche un po' esternamente e poi rimane tutta bello giallo. È un gesto scaramantico.
Sì, beh, giustamente le mucche mangiano, respirano l'aria di...
Anche il caciocavallo fa lo stesso.
E anche i caciocavalli. Ecco perché sono poi appesi
Sì, sono
in
a
coppia.
cavallo del gancio.
Ah, ecco. Quindi abbiamo spiegato anche il significato.
A cavallo means over the hook, hence the name of the cheese. The tree is actually the only time the cheeses will see some sunlight, as the pair will spend the rest of their aging days in caves. The minimum aging is 6 weeks, and the maximum 2 years. Today, Virginio has prepared a 6-month-old caciocavallo for us to taste. A cheese this old is worth $40 a kilo, which translates into just over $100 a piece.
Praticamente noi abbiamo la buccia, quella esterna, che va buttata via. Noi ci rendiamo conto che il caciocavallo è stagionato quando questa inizia a diventare dorata.
Ah sì, si vede. La buccia è molto spessa e all'interno praticamente molto granuloso.
La buccia praticamente funziona come un contenitore per il caciocavallo, per il formaggio vero e proprio.
È un po' come un formaggio, un parmigiano, insomma un grano, un formaggio granuloso, grazie. Wow. Si sentono degli aromi. È un po' salato in effetti, ma è la salamoia o proprio
no,
è proprio lo iodio e l'aria della terra? Si sente.
Peccato non è il sale da cucina.
Sì, è il sale cioè sale marino, insomma. Di solito sono un po' più morbidi, un po' più dolci. C'è anche un po' piccante, no?
Sì.
Questo è anche l'effetto dell'aria salata praticamente, del luogo.
Dell'area in cui viviamo.
Sì. Buono. E quindi normalmente si mangia così, c'è neanche con un pezzo di pane, proprio...
Con un po' di pane da solo. L'alimento è praticamente il formaggio che chiude il pranzo.
Next, we travel to Puglia, the home of Burrata, and visit a dairy that produces about 500 kilos of fresh cheese every day.
We're in Monopoli, Italy, a beautiful coastal town in the region of Puglia, which is the region where burrata cheese is from. Burrata is one of those foods that has a very short shelf life. It has to be eaten fresh, the same day. So trying a burrata here in Puglia is truly a culinary experience. And trust me, I'm from around here, but I live abroad and I've tried countless times to bring them with me in my suitcases, and they've never been as good as the ones that I've tried here.
So today we're going to do exactly that. We're going to visit a local dairy and get our own burrata experience. Let's go. In Italy, we met with Vincenzo Titrani, son, grandson and great-grandson of cheesemakers and owner of Mozzarella. His dairy produces about 500 kilos of fresh cheese every day. Vincenzo and his team start the day way before the sun is up. At 4 a.m., the milk has been acidified and it is ready to be split into curds. It now rests in this vat at 35 degrees with a whey starter and rennet.
Noi usiamo solo il metodo, un vecchio metodo, che è il siero innesto, invece di usare additivi chimici tipo acido citrico, acido lattico e quant'altro. Noi usiamo il siero del giorno prima per poterlo acidificare il latte il giorno dopo, perché per la burrata il latte va acidificato, altrimenti non fila.
Che strumento utilizzi?
Questo è uno strumento apposito fatto in acciaio per poter tagliare la cagliata, si chiama cestino. Poi ognuno ha il suo nome, in base alle regioni ha il suo nome.
Quindi
Da
qui
noi
si
il
chiama
cestino.
così. È meglio tagliare la cagliata così piuttosto che utilizzare, non so...
La chitarra, dipende dai formaggi va utilizzata la chitarra, dei formaggi va usato il cestino, ci sono diverse tipologie di taglio.
Ah, ma quindi prima usi la parte, diciamo, più piccola?
Sì, questo è il primo taglio, questo serve a far rinforzare la proteina del latte, in modo che nel secondo taglio non rilascia latte ma è già bello forte.
Quindi questo lo utilizzerai domani?
Questo siero, parte di questo siero lo utilizzo domani. Così diamo un secondo taglio, continuiamo a rinforzare sempre il reticolo della proteina, molto lentamente.
Ma si deve proprio
Allora, in base al
ecco,
la grandezza del chicco va in base al tipo di formaggi. Se facciamo dei formaggi stagionati deve essere come un chicco di riso. Se facciamo dei formaggi molli, allora lo possiamo fare quanto una noce oppure quanto un fagiolo, dipende dai formaggi.
Per la burrata invece,
per la burrata va alla misura del fagiolo.
Quindi ci siamo quasi.
Quasi, sì. Il taglio della cagliata è importante al 50% sulla riuscita del formaggio, quindi ha un buon valore.
Esatto, sì. Ma questi non sono i pezzettini che ritroviamo là nella burrata?
No,
giusto?
no. Questo è per creare l'involucro della burrata. È la parte interna, però mischiata con la panna, che poi facciamo nel secondo momento. Diciamo che per fare la burrata non è solo il taglio.
Our cheese curds have reached their desired bean size. They will now have to rest in the whey for 1.5 hours. Vincenzo uses this time to take out part of the liquid whey, adding milk to it and transform it into ricotta.
Quanto manca adesso?
Adesso vediamo, facciamo la prova e vediamo quanto manca.
Perché è passata una mezz'oretta.
Facciamo prova a filatura.
Quindi questa è acqua calda.
Acqua calda a 90 gradi. Abbiamo bisogno ancora di 3/4 d'ora.
Da cosa te ne accorgi?
Vedi, dal tipo di filatura, perché rompe ancora.
Ah, invece non
deve
dovrebbe
filare
rompersi.
senza rompersi.
While the curd is still resting in its whey to reach the perfect stretchability, a part of it is taken out to make the inside of the burrata. These are called sfilaccetti and are little shreds of frayed, stretched curd which will be salted and mixed with cream to make stracciatella. Vincenzo uses 90-degree water to stretch the curd.
Ma quindi se la lavorazione è comunque la stessa, perché questa è la stessa cagliata, come mai poi nella burrata troviamo la parte esterna e la parte interna diverse?
No, la lavorazione è uguale, perché la lavorazione per farlo della stracciatella è la lavorazione della mozzarella, è solo l'aggiunta di panna. Per comodità si fanno degli sfilaccetti lunghi dove è più facile sfilacciare.
Ah, quindi la parte interna della burrata, gli sfilaccetti. Oh, guarda, si inizia già a filare adesso. Questo attrezzo in legno, come si chiama?
Si chiama stecca. Da noi si chiama stecca.
Ed è fatto apposta proprio per fare la
Sì, è di
la
legno di
filatura.
faggio, sì.
Quanto tempo ci vuole a filarla?
Allora, dipende. Questa che è un po' più acerba per poter fare gli sfilaccetti, un po' di più. Quando faremo la burrata, per fare l'involucro,
Perché più tempo passa nel siero,
è più, certo, più siamo
più è facile poi maneggiarla. Sì, qui dentro c'è acqua calda, però
Sì.
adesso la stai mettendo nel ghiaccio.
Nell'acqua fredda,
Acqua
per
fredda.
raffreddarla, sì.
Perché altrimenti continua la filatura.
No, altrimenti non si può sfilacciare per fare la stracciatella se non è ben fredda.
Ah sì, deve essere fredda?
Sì.
Però poi quando va inserita nella burrata invece
La burrata è
sarà
calda. Sì, certo.
Ah ok, quindi c'è un contrasto di caldo
Sì.
e freddo. E con l'acqua...
Giochiamo con le temperature,
Sì.
molto qua.
Infatti qua fa caldissimo. Se potessi mi ci butterei io dentro questa acqua fredda.
Each piece of curd is then frayed one by one, and here we have our sfilaccetti.
Questa cosa non si potrebbe mai fare a macchina.
A macchina si può fare, hanno inventato la macchina.
Veramente?
Sì, solo che non ha lo stesso effetto perché viene un po' sbriciolata. Invece la vera burrata
sì, certo.
deve essere sfilacciata. Purtroppo in questo mestiere il tempo è un ingrediente.
Sì.
Anche l'attesa della cagliata è un ingrediente quello, perché quell'attesa
certo, sì.
non fa altro che rinforzare la cagliata, puoi mettere un po' di sale in più, ha un sapore diverso. È come il pane con lievito madre
Sì,
e
esatto.
il pane con lievito di birra. E quello fa in un attimo, quello invece ha bisogno di 2 giorni magari.
È
per
vero, è
poter
vero.
lievitare.
Quindi
È
lo
uguale,
stesso
la stessa
concetto
procedura.
lo applichi anche
Sì.
ai formaggi freschi, la mozzarella, la burrata, eccetera. Ma quindi questo sarebbe il ripieno di tutte le burrate
Sì.
della giornata. Quindi comunque...
O così oppure affumicata.
Cioè proprio così la stracciatella
Stracciatella affumicata.
Ah, la stracciatella
burrata-
affumicata
sì.
esiste. Non l'ho mai mangiata così, affumicata.
Buona affumicata.
Now that we have our inside, it's finally time to take care of the casing of the burrata.
Ma sembra già più morbida effettivamente.
morbida.
Ma invece tu che stai sollevando la stecca come la senti? La senti più pesante?
No,
o-
no, è chiaro, si sente molto la differenza.
Sì.
Ma già dal livello di lucentezza si vede.
Ah sì, è vero. Non perché adesso è un po' più tardi, quindi c'è
No,
la
no,
foto
no, no,
giorno
livello
e
di
si vede di
lucentezza.
più.
Questa per la burrata che devi avere appena diciamo, la buccia un po' più rinforzata, la facciamo così. La mozzarella devi ancora scendere ancora un po' di
Ancora
pH.
di più.
Sì.
Quindi per la mozzarella
Deve stare
bisogna
ancora un po'.
aspettare ancora di più.
When the casing is ready, all it takes is a swift movement to add in the stracciatella prepared previously. This is the first burrata of the day at Vincenzo's Dairy.
Adesso dalla rimanenza delle burratine ti faccio vedere il nostro, da dove viene il nostro marchio di fabbrica.
Che cosa stai facendo adesso? Una
Adesso
mozzarella?
ti faccio vedere.
Vediamo un po'. Uno spirale.
È una rosa.
Bellissima.
Te la dono.
E mi fai un mazzo magari. Questo mazzo di rose mi piacerebbe riceverlo, più dei fiori. È una burrata a forma di rosa, ci avete
Si può
pensato?
fare, come no? Certo.
Sì.
Lo possiamo fare ovunque.
Come mai la rosa?
Perché mi veniva bene questo tipo di testa di scamorza e da lì è partito il mio marchio, che è unica, non la fa nessuno.
Quindi questa è stata un'idea
almeno
tua.
finora.
Questi sono 200 grammi.
Ah, anche 300.
Anche 300. Vabbè, non siamo timidi. Da quanti anni la fai?
Da piccolo. Che faccio questo mestiere sono quasi 35 anni. È una cosa che viene tramandata di padre in figlio da 3 generazioni. Il primo casaro della mia famiglia era nato nel 1860, qualcosa del genere.
Questa è una burrata fresca?
E questa è appena fatta, l'abbiamo fatta ora.
Wow, guarda questa panna, incredibile. C'è un sacco di stracciatella dentro. Sono abituata alle burrate che si trovano all'estero, che sono proprio tutta panda.
No, allora, quella è la
terribile.
differenza che ti dicevo della macchina.
Sì.
Quando viene tritata a macchina la stracciatella diventa come una cremina. Invece
sì.
fatta a mano, e questa è la vera stracciatella.
Wow, fantastica. Questa non si può assaggiare,
Certo,
no?
assaggia.
Questa è la mia colazione. Sai, quando sono andata in Spagna mi hanno fatto fare colazione con il prosciutto, prosciutto e olio. E giustamente qua in Puglia, caffè e burrata.
Burrata.
Incredibile.
È come un cappuccino.
Sì, beh, il latte c'è. Beh, alla salute.
Buon appetito.
Andato via. Buonissima. It's so creamy, it's incredible. You don't feel that there is like the small little pieces and the outside part which is harder. It melts in your mouth.
Non ha un sapore piatto come se fatta con l'acido citrico, ma ha un sapore un po' più acidulo. Insomma, a livello di sapidità è superiore. Poi noi abbiamo il latte dei pascoli, non abbiamo il latte delle mucche chiuse nelle stalle. Abbiamo meno resa, meno proteine, più grassi, un valore di colorante un po' superiore, però la sapidità è irraggiungibile.
At this dairy in Locorotondo, Italy, cheesemakers transform whey into ricotta.
We're in Locorotondo, Italy, and today we're going to see how ricotta is made. Ricotta is a very versatile cheese, we all know it, that can be eaten in very different ways. And technically speaking, it's not even really a cheese, because it comes from the liquid whey when the milk is curdled. So today we're going to visit a small dairy here in the countryside to find out more about how it's made. Let's go.
Ricotta is part of a family of fresh cheeses that are normally eaten the same day. Fresh dairy products are very popular in southern Italy, where each region will make its own version of ricotta depending on the milk used and its flavor profiles. Puglia, the region we're in today, favors a soft, delicate ricotta made with liquid whey derived from cow's milk. Bigger dairies that make cheese often consider liquid whey just a leftover product and use it to feed livestock or even discard it. But for smaller, local dairies here in Italy, it is a great opportunity to optimize their resources and get something great out of them. Just like its sisters, Mozzarella and Burrata, ricotta is a game of time and chemistry.
La ricotta in realtà non è un formaggio né un prodotto del latte, è un sottoprodotto, nel senso che prima si lavora il latte, si recupera il siero e si recupera la ricotta.
Quindi diciamo che per produrre non si potrebbe mai produrre solamente la ricotta, perché sarebbe uno spreco alla fine di cagliata, cioè per un caseificio.
Sì, diciamo che la ricotta è un prodotto fondamentale per l'economia, nel senso la recuperi così dagli scarti, quindi per l'economia di un'azienda è molto importante.
Today, Giovanni is going to show us how he makes ricotta from 100 liters of milk. Out of this 100 liters, only 10 will turn into curds that will then make cheese. But cheese is not the star of the show for us today. In reality, as much as 90% of what's in here is liquid whey, and that's all going to be turning into ricotta.
Quindi noi oggi andremo a fare una caciotta morbida, molto umida, che tende a trattenere molta umidità, quindi recupereremo circa un 10-11%. Il resto sarà tutto il siero che andremo a recuperare per la ricotta.
Ok.
Quindi un sottoprodotto che recupereremo per la ricotta. Abbiamo portato il latte a 40 gradi, quindi un latte crudo, riscaldato, appena munto stamattina. Gli andremo solo ad aggiungere del caglio, nient'altro.
Questo sarebbe il caglio?
Questo è il caglio, sì, caglio animale di vitello.
E quindi con l'aggiunta di questo caglio tu...
Passeremo il latte dalla fase liquida alla fase solida.
Okay,
il caglio praticamente serve a questo. Aspetteremo un 10 minuti, un quarto d'ora circa.
Quindi è molto veloce?
È un passaggio abbastanza veloce, sì.
È una tempistica, diciamo...
È una tempistica che varia in base al tipo di formaggio, esatto. In base al tipo di caglio o in base alle dosi da usare anche. Una volta cagliato il latte, nel senso che ha fatto presa, è diventato gelatinoso, non solido, sì. Andremo a fare la rottura del coagulo con il classico attrezzo, si chiama lo spino. Andremo a separare la parte solida, che rimarrà, dalla parte liquida, che sarà il siero. In base al tipo di grano che poi andremo a lasciare dipenderà il tipo di formaggio.
E anche il tipo di attrezzo.
Il tipo di attrezzo sì, diciamo che possiamo usare questo, ce ne sono altri per altre tipologie di formaggio, però diciamo che questo è quello che va per la maggiore. Con questo se ne possono fare la maggior parte.
Sì, questo l'ho visto, anche in dimensioni più grandi.
Parecchio più grandi. Sì. Appena si inizia a rompere, comunque il coagulo rimane morbido, quindi bisogna essere delicati, non bisogna romperlo tanto, più di tanto, con i suoi tempi e aspettare che comunque prenda la consistenza che vogliamo, quindi dargli sempre il tempo che ha il tipo di formaggio.
Che dimensione avrà?
Visto che noi andremo a fare un formaggio morbido, quindi come fosse una noce.
Ah, questa dimensione?
Questa dimensione, però dobbiamo sempre aspettare che si andrà ad indurire, in modo da non perdere troppo siero. Quindi più è piccolo, più si lo perde, più sarà asciutto il formaggio alla fine.
Va bene. E per quanto tempo lo romperai?
Il tempo dipende sempre no, più che dalla dimensione, dalla durezza che prende il chicco. Quindi diciamo che entra in gioco anche il fattore del latte, quindi più sono alte le proteine all'interno del latte, più sarà duro e quindi sarà diverso il movimento.
When the curds have reached the desired texture and size, Giovanni will extract them and place them into molds, which will go on to age and become cheese. Finally free from its curdled twin, the liquid whey is ready to be turned into ricotta.
Una volta recuperato, lo aggiungiamo semplicemente di sale, era una soluzione di acqua e sale. Lo porteremo a 60 gradi per aggiungere del latte, quindi comunque una piccola parte di latte c'è, e lo riporteremo fino a 85 gradi per permettere l'affioramento della ricotta.
Quindi la ricotta praticamente sarà, cosa sarà? La cagliata di quel latte che aggiungerai? Cioè come si fa a formare questa ricotta cremosa?
La ricotta è un passaggio più delicato forse, è l'affioramento del grasso che si lega con le siroproteine. Okay. Le siroproteine che non sono influenzate nel formaggio dal caglio vengono recuperate nella ricotta. Quindi sono sempre proteine del latte che si legano al grasso che andremo ad aggiungere del latte a una temperatura di 85 gradi con una piccola quantità di acido, noi ci andremo ad aggiungere del siero innesto, tende a far affiorare questa unione che si crea tra siroproteine e grasso.
Ah, va bene.
Che salirà, esatto, salirà tutta, affiorerà. Esatto. È il termine giusto.
Giovanni then starts heating up the whey to add milk and ferments to it. If we had to judge a step by how loud it is, I'd say this is definitely a crucial one. Thankfully for our ears, it was also a pretty quick one.
Ma questa che si è formata qui in superficie è panna?
È solo schiuma. La schiuma del cappuccino, cioè per intenderci.
Ma infatti, cioè, questa macchina fa esattamente lo stesso rumore di una macchinetta del caffè. Sembra di entrare in un bar, praticamente.
Magari.
E in quanto tempo raggiunge la temperatura 85 gradi?
È già arrivato.
Ah, è già arrivato. Quindi molto rapido.
While Giovanni carefully removes all the excess foam, we can see it slowly starting to surface, the ricotta we came for today.
Una volta affiorata si può solamente raccogliere.
Ok. La raccogli direttamente così?
Cercando di romperla il meno possibile, in modo da fare in modo che trattiene quanto più umidità possibile. Quindi...
Così viene bella morbida il risultato finale. E comunque deve essere un movimento abbastanza veloce, perché vedo che comunque un po' di siero cola, cioè non riesce a trattenerlo tutto.
Il siero comunque un po' lo perderà, è normale. Però più si rompe il coagulo, diciamo, quello che si è creato, più siero tenderà a perdere. Però comunque la ricotta dopo un po' tenderà a scendere giù. Una volta scesa giù non si può più raccogliere. Ma in questo mestiere ci sono tante cose dove bisogna prendere l'attimo giusto, partire dal formaggio, l'acidificazione, la filatura della mozzarella o un sacco di cose si possono fare solo in un determinato momento. Passato quel momento non sono più recuperabili.
Sempre stato un casaro.
Sì, cerco di approfondire sempre di più, ma sempre nello stesso settore, cioè non mi sono mai mosso da questo.
E come hai imparato?
Diciamo che ho iniziato come il lavoretto di fine scuola, d'estate, ho iniziato così a lavoricchiare. Poi è iniziata la passione, quindi non mi sono più allontanato. Diciamo che la tradizione ti insegna.
Next, we visit a 150-year-old family farm in the Netherlands to see how Dutch Gouda is made.
Every wheel of Dutch cheese starts in a vat filled with millions of tiny curds.
But I'm just checking if the curd is a bit equally divided.
The Netherlands produces nearly 1 billion kilos of cheese a year. More than half of it is Gouda, or Gouda, as it's pronounced here. Frank Kaptein is a 7th-generation dairy farmer. While most cheese is made in big factories with pasteurized milk, he makes a rare kind of Gouda, using raw milk. But now, farmers fear their cheesy tradition could be at risk. The Netherlands could close hundreds of dairy farms to curb nitrogen emissions. In 2017, the tiny country emitted more per hectare than any other European nation. And about half of it comes from agriculture. Especially animals pee and poop.
Cows are not potty trained, so they poop everywhere.
These emissions threaten native forests and wildlife. But critics say the country's emissions cuts unfairly target livestock farmers.
En dan zie je dat er toch wel een gevoel van onmacht is op het erf, hè, aan de keukentafel van ja, wat kan ik doen?
So how did Dutch farmers get stuck in a decades-old climate policy? And what does this mean for the rest of the world? Frank's family has been making cheese in the town of Zoeterwoude for over 150 years. Every day, he starts by warming over 600 gallons of milk, pumped in from the milking barn.
Milk floating in now is like 37 degrees, just the body temperature of a cow.
For every batch of cheese, he adds rennet, enzymes that make the proteins in the milk clump together into solid curds, leaving behind the liquid whey.
Rennet is like a pair of scissors cutting through the milk.
After 30 minutes, a giant curd has formed.
It should break open like that. That's good.
This machine starts cutting it into pieces.
And we cut it real small in order to have very little moisture in the cheese, in order to make a cheese which can age for years.
Frank's parents taught him how to make cheese when he was 22 years old.
My brother and I are the 7th generation Kaptein producing cheese and milking cows. And well, there will be at least 7 generations of cows walking on this farm as well.
He took over the family business with his brother in January of 2022.
I think 50% of Dutch people has a great-grandfather who's been a farmer. Farmers shaped the landscape in the Netherlands.
In the 13th century, nearly a fifth of what is now the Netherlands was underwater. Over the centuries, the Dutch built dikes to hold back the sea. Farmers drained large portions of the reclaimed land to plant crops. But one of the only things that would grow on the wet soil was grass. So raising cattle for meat, milk, and cheese became big business. The dairy industry eventually became a symbol of the Netherlands, as much as tulips and windmills. Milk and cows graced Dutch masterpieces by Vermeer and Van Gogh. By the 20th century, the Netherlands was producing so much cheese, it was a valuable export. Today, almost all Dutch dairy farms sell their milk to big factories that pasteurize it and use machines to make cheese on a large scale. But Frank only works with raw milk. Just 4% of Dutch dairy farms make Gouda in-house like he does.
We still produce it on the way like my great-grandfather did. And I don't know if that's extra good, but I like it.
And what machines do at factories, he still prefers doing by hand, like checking the consistency of the curds himself.
No, it's just a warm way. It's like almost 30 degrees. And the curd is real soft now. And now the curd over here is just like this deep under the whey, and over there there's no curd anymore. But I'm just checking if the curd is a bit equally divided, equally spread.
He can start draining out some of that liquid whey, but nothing goes to waste. He skims the fat to make butter and feeds the whey to his pigs.
The pigs are already happy with just whey. And I like butter on my sandwich in the morning.
He slices the leftover curd into sections large enough for a wheel of cheese. He gauges the right amount by feel. Meanwhile, Frank's employee Savannah prepares the old buckets, most of which were Frank's grandfather's.
There are only a handful of farmers in the Netherlands who still use wooden buckets.
Frank drifts a cloth below the surface and piles the curds on top. The cloth will help the last bit of whey drain out. They repeat the process for 12 wheels of cheese.
There's a lot of whey in, so I think about 25-30 kilograms, something like that. And it's cozy.
These presses squeeze out the remaining liquid. All this cheese comes from the milk of Frank's 200 female cows. The Netherlands has nearly 1.6 million of them, and they produce lots of nitrogen because of what they eat: fertilizer-grown grass in the summer and imported grain and soy year-round. Their pee is full of nitrogen too, and when it mixes with their poop, it creates a gas called ammonia. The plumes of ammonia drop down onto nature reserves and acidify the soil. Some nitrogen-loving plants like grass take over, while other native plants can't absorb proper nutrients. From there, it's a domino effect. Many native plants grow weak or die out. Snails can't get enough nutrients to build their shells. The birds that eat the snails can't develop eggs, or their chicks are born with frail bones. Inside one of the Netherlands' largest national parks, rangers like Annemieke Visser-Winterink say oak and pine trees are dying out.
They're all sick. There's not one that I would say, oh, you know, that's very, very fit or very a healthy tree. You can say that the trees are starving. It's not getting all the nutrients that it needs to be a very healthy, full-grown oak tree that it can be.
Environmentalists say 14 habitats in the country are on the brink of collapse.
The dairy sector is one of the drivers of biodiversity loss in the Netherlands.
Back in 1992, what is now the European Union adopted a law known as the Habitats Directive, requiring countries to designate nature areas for conservation. In order to comply, the Netherlands introduced policies to cut nitrogen on these protected lands. Back then, Dutch farms had one of the highest ammonia emission rates in Europe. By 2019, the industry had cut its emissions by almost 2/3. Covered manure storage, like below this slatted floor, has helped. If it stays sealed underground for enough time, the ammonia won't evaporate as much.
Everywhere we are standing, there's 2 meters deep basement full of manure and pee.
But these efforts alone weren't enough. The farms releasing the most ammonia sat near those protected nature reserves. The nation's highest court said the Netherlands needed to do more. The government scrambled to comply. Some lawmakers suggested cutting the number of animals in the country in half. Farmers were outraged. They protested for weeks, dumping manure on streets and blocking roads with tractors.
Het is voor ons bestaansrecht. Dus ja, ik hoop dat voor te zetten, maar dan moeten de regels wel mee gaan werken, anders zal dat niet mogelijk zijn.
By early 2023, the government lowered the goal to a 50% cut. But by then, a pro-farmer political party named the Farmer Citizen Movement had swept provincial elections. Rick Lueders is a party leader in this area.
We have a nitrogen law which is rigid and is fully focused on dairy farming, and we want that this law is gone.
Soon after, the government announced a $1.6 billion plan to buy out and close up to 3,000 high-emitting farms near nature reserves. A farmer can voluntarily take the buyout and possibly get more than their farm is worth. But for Frank, selling his 7-generation farm isn't an option. He says his cows are like family.
This is Gina. She's the highest ranking. She's the leader of the herd. She just bosses other cows away with her head, mainly. So when she wants to drink and there's another cow, boink, move aside. I'm Gina, here I am, and I want to drink.
He even got married on this farm, surrounded by his cows. And it's tradition in his family to name cows after relatives.
And I named the cow after my daughter as well.
Frank and his brother milk the cows twice a day.
First we clean the teeth, starting at left front, right rear, and left rear. And then we connect the milking claw. There's a little bit of vacuum underneath, so it sucks the milk away.
Frank gets about 8 gallons of milk a day from each cow. What he can milk in 15 minutes would have taken his grandfather an entire day. New technology helped dairy and livestock farms consolidate, beginning in the mid-20th century.
Little farmers, cheesemakers, they quit. And the bigger ones, they grow bigger.
To this day, between 70 and 80% of the country's dairy is sent abroad, mainly to other European countries.
That's all in the region of between, let's say, London, Paris and Berlin, within an area of 800 kilometers. In the USA, you would call that a local product.
The Netherlands is also the EU's largest exporter of meat. It trades about $9 billion worth of pork, beef, and poultry internationally every year. And it does it all on land not much bigger than the US state of Maryland. For much of the world, the Netherlands became a roadmap for how to farm efficiently at scale. But environmentalists like Natasha Orlemans from the World Wildlife Fund see it differently.
I see the Netherlands as an example of where everything went wrong. Exporting the meat and dairy and having a huge amount of manure here in the Netherlands, causing all these environmental and societal problems.
The farmers we spoke to said saving the environment should go hand in hand with preserving their centuries-old traditions. Traditions like flipping the cheese.
In the first 24 hours of the cheese, we turn it like 6 times.
Flipping ensures both sides of the wheel will be round, like the curve of the bucket.
See it already turning yellow. So it's a good sign.
Then he moves the cheese wheels into a salty brine.
The salt bath is mainly for making a crust around the cheese. A little bit of salt will get deeper into the cheese for a little bit of taste.
Frank ages his specialty Gouda for up to 10 years at a consistent 59 degrees Fahrenheit.
This is one is from 2013, so 10 years old now. And still looking shiny, still looking young.
Here he stores hundreds of wheels, over $100,000 worth of cheese.
Every day we turn them, put an extra layer of coating on top of it.
That liquid plastic coating seals in the moisture.
And of course to keep mold away. You hear it when I lift it, it gets stuck on the shell. So that's why you flip it as well.
As it ages, friendly bacteria build up amino acids, these crystals.
It's where the flavor of the cheese comes from.
Frank can tell it's aging well from the sound.
It's nice flat here. You hear it?
Frank is one of over 45,000 people working in the Dutch dairy industry.
If you just take out half of the farmers and half of the jobs and half of the income, where do these people going to work? They go to the cities probably, and the whole villages at the countryside will become ghost cities, I think.
Within 10 or 15 years, I'm worried, who's going to produce our food? And where is it coming from?
Many farmers now face a tough decision. Take the buyout, decrease their herds, move their farms, or make pricey upgrades to try to cut nitrogen emissions. But not everyone can afford costly innovations. Many farmers are working on narrow margins or are already in debt.
Farmers don't get a loan from the bank because they say, oh, we don't know if you can still farm after this due to these regulations.
Plus, farmers don't even know yet if innovations could actually save their farm from closure. Researchers at Wageningen University are hoping they can.
This is not a commercial dairy farm. It's a research center.
That's Kees de Koning. He runs the university's dairy campus. His team is testing different iterations of the slatted floor Frank has.
We can run trials where we separate the urine and the solids.
They're also studying the effect of robotic scrapers and poop vacuums. By quickly moving waste into closed storage, vacuums reduce methane and ammonia loss. But Kees estimates one like this could cost over $20,000. And a farm of 120 cows would need 2. Kees says changing cows' diets is a cheaper option.
So, can we feed cows in such a way that we have less ammonia emission or less nitrogen losses?
His team feeds the cows different combinations of food. Then they use these troughs to test how much the animals eat and their emissions.
The electronic ID system is identified, so we know exactly which cow is in the box.
So if innovations can't help, farmers still have the option of the buyout. As of November 2023, nearly 1,000 livestock farms had registered for it. Almost a quarter were dairy farms. But the government won't pay them out for a while.
It will take at least another 6 months to a year before that is finalized.
That same month, a new right-wing party, PVV, won the most seats in the country's parliamentary elections. Geert Wilders, the party's leader, spoke at farmer protests earlier in the year.
They are killing our farmers for some idiotic leftist liberal so-called nitrogen problem in the Netherlands.
The party has signaled it wants to stop government spending on initiatives to curb nitrogen, including the fund for the buyout plan. Rick hopes the PVV will form a coalition with other pro-farmer parties.
We can make new laws. It's quite simple.
But a coalition could take months. The World Wildlife Fund says this delay will only lead to further deterioration of nature. Meanwhile, farmers are in limbo.
It's the limbo that paralyzes the agricultural sector. And that limbo is very dangerous for nature as well, because it's still suffering. It's horrible, and I can feel for them.
This problem isn't unique to the Netherlands. Dairy farmers in Ireland might have to decrease the size of their herds because of unsafe nitrogen levels in rivers, which are causing algae blooms. New Zealand has some of the most polluted waterways in the world. Dairy farming is one of the biggest sources of these dangerous nitrate levels in drinking water. And in the US state of California, agriculture has contributed to hazardous air pollution. All of these countries will have to contend with the same questions the Netherlands faces today. How do we feed ourselves, preserve tradition, keep economies running, and protect our planet?
I don't see myself as being opposing to farmers. I'm opposed to the system the way it is now. It's ecologically a disaster, and it's also not bringing farmers a proper income. So Basically, it's a system that's being broken, and that system needs to be fixed.
Frank seems open to a fix too.
If it helps nature or climate, bring it on.
Maybe then his family can continue making cheese for another 7 generations.
I hope that dairy farmers have a future in the Netherlands. I think we're really connected to the landscape. I hope farms won't grow too big, so it can be run on a family scale. I think that's a beautiful way of living.
A French favorite, Camembert holds a special place in the hearts of cheese lovers. Sweet and creamy, Camembert holds a special place in the heart of cheese lovers.
Today we're in Normandy, France, and we are in the village of Bermonville. We are visiting Les Cinq Frères, which is a local farm, to see how traditional farmhouse Camembert cheese is made.
To be called Camembert, a cheese has to weigh at least 250 grams, be 10 centimeters in diameter, and have about 22% fat content. And it has to come from Normandy. This region in northern France is in fact where the cheese was born. Legend has it that it was first made in 1791 in the village of Camembert by Marie Harel, a farmer from Normandy, after a priest from Brie shared cheesemaking tips with her. Although Marie really existed, it's probable that the cheese originated a few centuries earlier, in the 12th century. But thanks to Marie and her family after her, Camembert started to be produced on a larger scale and gained popularity. Fast forward a few hundred years, the Normands still take great pride in it.
Le Camembert, c'est du lait, du terroir et de l'authenticité. C'est un fromage qui est intimement lié, c'est-à-dire que le Camembert, c'est vraiment le fromage normand. C'est un fromage à pâte molle, où voilà, il y a une croûte fleurie tout autour, et c'est vraiment l'emblème de la Normandie, c'est le Camembert.
Les Cinq Frères is a family-run farm that grows wheat, rapeseed, barley and other cereals. It makes 400 wheels of Camembert every day.
Notre entreprise, elle est assez ancienne. C'est une exploitation familiale et donc elle appartenait à mon grand-père, ensuite à notre père et aujourd'hui avec mes 4 frères, on est 5 garçons. C'est pour ça qu'on a appelé le Camembert le 5 frères, c'est parce que voilà, on est une fratrie de 5 frères et qu'on travaille ensemble sur l'exploitation.
It takes 2 liters of milk to make 1 wheel of Camembert. Before being transformed into cheese, the milk has to mature for a day. This allows microorganisms to flourish and to acidify the milk, so when rennet is added, the curd develops faster. Then the milk is ladled by hand 5 times every hour.
Et donc on aperçoit que le caillé peut s'égoutter tranquillement, lentement, et voilà, c'est comme ça qu'on peut rajouter du caillé après dans les moules. On ne peut pas faire les 5 fois en même temps parce qu'il n'y a pas assez de place dans les moules pour verser les 5 louches d'une seule fois. Il faut être patient, il faut attendre 1 heure entre chaque louche pour laisser le temps au caillé de bien s'égoutter.
After ladling, the cheese is salted and left to dry for 1 day.
Ce sont des fromages qui sont jeunes, qui ont 1 journée, ils ont été faits hier et donc là, ils passent 1 journée dans cette salle-là pour sécher. C'est-à-dire que l'objectif, c'est d'avoir une surface bien sèche, qu'il n'y ait plus de lactosérum tout autour du fromage. Et donc, demain matin, je vais les retourner. Et donc là, en fait, on peut voir les 5 louches. Et donc ça veut dire que c'est une fabrication authentique, artisanale.
Camembert ages for 4 to 5 weeks. This allows a fungus to grow all around the cheese and age it.
Il y a un mélange de plusieurs flores pour faire le camembert, mais principalement au niveau de la croûte extérieure, on ajoute du géotrichum et du pénicillium. Et donc au début, elle est toute blanche, et plus le fromage s'affine, plus elle vieillit et après le fromage il devient un petit peu marron sur les arêtes, sur le tour, et le fromage est aussi crémeux. Donc plus on avance dans le temps, plus le fromage il change un petit peu de couleur, quoi, il brunit et il est plus affiné, quoi.
Traditionally, Camembert is packaged in paraffin paper and placed in a wooden box.
Pourquoi on l'emballe dans une boîte en bois? C'est pour bien que le fromage il soit formé et surtout que la forme du fromage elle reste jusqu'à la fin. Parce que plus le fromage il s'affine après, plus il est crémeux, il est un peu mou. Et donc s'il n'est pas maintenu dans une boîte en bois, après il coule. Et donc c'est pas joli, on ne peut pas vendre ça.
You may associate Camembert with a strong, stinky cheese smell. It's actually because of the milk used.
C'est-à-dire que c'est du lait cru. C'est parce qu'on ne chauffe pas le lait, donc c'est toute la flore qui est dans le lait qui donne cette odeur un petit peu forte. Mais l'odeur est plus forte que le goût. C'est-à-dire qu'en goût, le fromage il est plutôt doux, il est crémeux, mais c'est lié au lait cru et au mode de fabrication. Et aussi à l'alimentation des vaches, parce que du coup, ce que les vaches mangent a une influence sur la nature du lait et donc l'évolution et le goût au final, quoi. Celui-là, il est assez jeune, il n'est pas encore complètement crémeux. Cette partie-là, elle est encore dure. Et donc, il faudrait attendre encore 2, 3 ou 4 semaines pour qu'il soit complètement crémeux.
So this is the Camembert that Charles just cut for us. Let's give it a try. Oh, it's nice. It's nice. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure how you could wait 2 more weeks. It's really good. Biting into the outside part of the cheese, you start to get those like typical flavors of Camembert. You get the gooiness, you get a bit of a sour aftertaste. You can taste more of the milk in here, and you can taste that it's raw milk. Maybe it's not as like creamy as you know, the one that I'm used to, that is like just the standard one I buy at the supermarket. But again, the flavors here are stronger. Like the flavors here are more robust, and actually, if you can see, there is some creaminess going on in here. Just by far the best one I've ever had, regardless of how much time it has been on the shelves.
The popularity of the soft, creamy cheese has led Camembert-style cheeses to be made all over the world. France alone makes 360 million wheels of Camembert each year, and the cheese has become a symbol of French culture. It was used to feed French soldiers during World War I and even gave its name to the pie chart, which in French is called un diagramme en Camembert. More and more dairies have started to pasteurize their milk for health and safety reasons, leaving only a few farmers in France still making it the traditional way, using raw milk, which is permitted in Europe but forbidden in the US.
Les clients sont très attachés à l'origine géographique des produits et donc c'est important de faire du camembert en Normandie. Et donc on peut faire du camembert ailleurs, mais ça n'a pas la même saveur, ça n'a pas le même goût. Et comme on ne réchauffe pas trop le lait, le camembert il a vraiment le goût de ce que les vaches mangent ici. Et donc le camembert qu'on fabrique ici à la ferme, il a un goût qu'on ne peut pas imiter.
Our next cheese is a creamy combo of milks native to Greece.
Feta cheese is made with a combination of sheep's milk and goat's milk, which gives it that creaminess and an extra kick compared to cow's milk cheeses. But depending on where you are in Greece, you will get a different taste in feta, from soft and buttery to hard and tangy. It's all down to the combination of the two milks and how much of them you use. We're here in the Peloponnese to find out what other secrets are behind the making of feta cheese.
Γιατί μπορεί να έχεις μια φέτα που να είναι μόνο πρόβια και μπορεί να έχεις και μια φέτα που να έχει μέχρι 30% γύρινο μεσοπρόβιο. Απαγορεύεται το αγελαδινό, απαγορεύεται, έτσι. Εμείς δουλεύουμε περίπου με 90% πρόβιο και 10% γύρινο.
Why do you use a combination of the two? Like, how does that change the taste?
Έτσι που θέλουμε να είναι παράλληλα και βουτυράτη, αλλά ταυτόχρονα να είναι και ελαφρώς πικάντικη. Μέσα θα ήταν πολύ βουτυράτο, αλλά δεν θα είχαμε αυτή την πιπεράτα που δίνει το γύρινο.
The milk that you see here in these vats has rested for a day at cool temperatures and has been pasteurized. It is now ready to be turned into cheese. Once each batch has cooled to 35 degrees Celsius, Yorio's dad, Athanasius, adds cultures to the milk to kickstart its fermentation.
Από εδώ είναι ο πατέρας μου, είναι από το γεννημένος το 1948, είναι 73 χρονών. Η συνταγή η πρώτη ήταν της γιαγιάς μου το 1950. Μετά ο πατέρας μου μεγαλώνοντας την εξέλιξε.
After the cultures rest 20 minutes, Athanasius proceeds to add rennet. The rennet used also comes from two kinds of milk. This time it is a mix of cows and goats to add extra spice. Each batch rests for 55 minutes and is then cut into curds. The curds are cut first vertically and then horizontally to achieve perfect cubes.
Yeah, well, you just like to cut things in cube a lot.
After being cut, the curds are transferred into molds, which are in the shape of cubes, of course. While other cheeses go into molds and all their whey is pressed out, Feta's molds have some holes in them to gently drain the whey but without losing it all. And we'll find out why soon. Here, each cube holds 8 kilos of curd and whey, but will eventually weigh just 6 kilos. After a 2-hour break, each cube is cut into 1 kilo blocks and salted. Athanasius is putting salt beneath and over the blocks to evenly coat the cheese. It will rest for 24 hours. You may have noticed these plastic separators. They are used to keep gently draining whey out of the feta curd. This liquid whey mixed with the salt draining is in fact going to make feta's natural brine. Once the packaging is sealed, feta will release even more liquid, adding to that brine.
So how many kilos is this?
20.
20, okay. God, great kettlebell.
Για κούμπα το λίγο.
Feta ages for 15 days at 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. The temperature and aging time contribute to the intensity of flavor. The longer it ages, the more acidity it gains.
Εμείς κάνουμε μια πολύ καλή ορίμαση εδώ, ώστε να έχουμε πιο έντονη γεύση. Άμα δεν οριμάσει το τυρί, καταρχήν θα είναι άγευστο. Οπότε δεν θα είναι υπόξενο, θα είναι σαν χορτάρι. Το πρώτο πράγμα που βλέπουμε στο τυρί, αν είναι όριμο, είναι το χρώμα της άλμης, αν είναι πολύ κίτρινο ή όχι, και το χρώμα του τυριού. Μετά βλέπουμε, πιέζοντας το τυρί χαμηλά κάτω-κάτω, πόσο εύκολα ή δύσκολα πάει κάτω και πόσο εύκολα ή δύσκολα έρχεται επάνω. Άμα είναι πιο όριμο, έρχεται πιο γρήγορα. Μετά βλέπουμε και αν τα κομμάτια μεταξύ τους αρχίζουν και αποκτούν χώρο, που σημαίνει ότι αρχίζει οριμάζει το τυρί και σφίγγει. Είναι και αυτό ένας τρόπος. Taste.
Oh yeah, of course. Nice texture.
Και είναι και ζεστό ακόμα. Είναι και ζεστό. Βουτυράτο. Ναι, είναι υπόξινο και απλά είναι και βουτυράτο ταυτόχρονα. Έτσι. Αλλά σε 3-4 μέρες θα είναι αυτή η γεύση, αλλά λίγο πιο σκληρό. Και θα είναι just.
Feta used to be aged in barrels. I've read that the barrels used to add a little bit of spice and the rennet giving it that bitterness.
Είναι πάρα πολύ μεγάλος μύθος ότι επηρεάζει τη γεύση, την επηρεάζει. Αλλά αυτό δεν σημαίνει ότι θα έχεις καλύτερη γεύση.
After the first 15 aging days at mild temperature, feta is then stored at a cold temperature for 45 days to reach its full taste and aroma.
Μισό κιλό το κάνα.
Thank you.
Δεν έχουμε κρασί μόνο.
You can taste the goat milk there. There is that hint of spiciness. It's like the one we had before, with that extra crumbliness as well in the texture. It's a nice balance of flavor. You get like that aftertaste, that kick with it.
Από εκεί πέρα να είναι λίγο πιπεράτη, γιατί θέλουμε και λίγο το γίδινο μέσα. Οπότε έχουμε να έχει βουτυράδα, να είναι υπόξινη, να είναι πιπεράτη. Και από εκεί πέρα να είναι και σε σκληρότητα, μέτρια στο σκληρότητα. Η γιαγιά μου την έκανε αρκετά πιο σκληρή. Η ίδια γεύση, αλλά πολύ σκληρή. Ο πατέρας μου την έκανε, άλλαξε και την κάνει μέτρια στα σκληράδα, οπότε είναι και λίγο πιο βουτυράτη. Και αυτό ήταν και πια η επιτυχία. Το τρώω όλο τώρα εδώ πέρα, να ξέρεις, γιατί είναι πολύ ωραίο έτσι κι αλλιώς.
Stilton is one of the most beloved British cheeses.
Today we're in the village of Colston Bassett in Nottinghamshire, England, to learn more about how blue Stilton cheese is made. Today we're going to learn about its history and origin, and I will also be getting my hands dirty in the process. And then, of course, we're going to taste it. This cheese can only be made in 6 dairies, which are spread across 3 counties here in England, which are Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire and Derbyshire. And today we're going to visit Colston Bassett Dairy, which is one of the 6 dairies making Stilton cheese.
Stilton cheese takes its name from the village of Stilton in the east of England. The earliest reports of cheese made and sold here date to the 17th century. In 1724, English writer Daniel Defoe referred to the town being famous for cheese, calling the product the English Parmesan. What contributed to its popularity was that Stilton was relatively close to London, only 70 miles away. The town was on the Great North Road. Built by the Romans, this road was the only link between London and Edinburgh before modern motorways took over. The road passed through villages and market towns filled with coaching inns. One of these was the Bell Inn, where a lady named Frances Powlett sold her cheese to travellers, and the word of her Stilton cheese quickly started to travel with them. And though she probably did not invent the cheese herself, she is responsible for expanding its popularity beyond the village.
That was her route to market. It was basically a wayfares for the carriages, so people would stop overnight, and a lot of the cheese was sold there and taken down into London by travellers.
As its popularity grew, Stilton cheese started to be made in the surrounding areas. Today, Stilton production has strict geographical borders and is confined to 3 counties in England. Ironically, as the village of Stilton falls outside of the county's borders, there can't be any cheese made in Stilton called Stilton. Colston Bassett Dairy was founded in 1913 as a cooperative to save excess milk from farms in the village from going to waste. Today, the dairy works with 4 farms that supply 4 million litres of milk a year.
Over the last 100 and something years, they've gone from making 3 months a year, probably making 50, 60 cheese a day, to making 7 days a week. And we are doing, in peak, about 180 cheese a day.
The farms send the milk to the dairy, where it is pasteurized.
What we do is we take the milk, we add a blue mold culture, start a culture to produce acidity, and then we add rennet, which will help us clot the milk and turn it into curd. Once we've set it and it looks like a giant jelly, a giant white jelly, we will cut the curd, release the moisture, and we'll drain that moisture off. Quite specific to us, all of our cheese will be hand ladled from vat to trolley, and that's just a transfer of curd from one large vessel to another. That will give us moisture release without losing too many fatty proteins to weigh. Mechanised processes, large-scale business, people who are transferring large volumes can and do lose fatty proteins to weigh. We do, but just less because we're doing it by hand.
If you think that ladling is just about transferring the curds from one vat to another, think again. Billy showed me how to do it, and I had a go myself.
So the thing to remember is not to dig, keep it quite flat and just push it through.
And that's it?
Very good. Okay, so you also need to...
No.
It needs to all come down to the same depth.
Oh.
So you can't have some deep, some not. So it's exactly the same all the way down. Same here.
So I'm just going to try one more for the road. Okay.
And that bit of cheese is now dead. You can let Craig have it and we'll get on with it.
Thank you. So you know when you say one day I'm going to quit everything and become a cheesemaker? Not an easy task, but you have to think it through.
So once we've ladled, we will then allow it to settle, and again more whey will come out, and then you will drain that whey, and once you start draining the whey, the bacteria that's in the curd will start to multiply and produce quite a high level of lactic acid overnight. And then the next morning we'll come in, and at a specific lactic acid point we will break the curds by milling so it's a uniform size, We'll hand salt the curds, hand mix the curds, and form it up into a cheese hoop, as you see behind me.
The cheese is placed in a warm room to allow some of the moisture to evaporate. The cheese is turned every day, and when it's dry enough and can stand on its own, the mold is taken off.
We need to stop the aerobic mold growing at that stage, because if you make it grow too quickly with Stilton, it won't taste right because you're changing the pH too quickly. So we will take a knife and we will actually rub the outside of the cheese, and by rubbing the outside of the cheese, we create a barrier so no oxygen can get inside, and we stop the mold growth at that, or the blue mold growth at that particular stage of production.
Then the wheels are turned every day. When they're 5 or 6 weeks old, they are pierced to allow oxygen in, which will activate the blue mold and produce the Stilton's characteristic blue veins. Then the cheese matures for another 5 weeks.
Put it on straight, and then turn it all the way around. Right, now gently bring it out.
So this one is almost ready, yeah?
Almost, not quite. I mean, the other end might not be quite so firm because they don't mature in uniform. So what we should see, it'll start the bloom process from the centre and work out. So we can tell, looking at that, it's not ready yet because it's not fully blued. But mind your finger when you're bringing it back out. So push it to the centre, stop, finger on. Now use your other hand.
Like that?
Finger on, usually your thumb. And have it up in the gap, and then pull it out gently. And then just clean it so that that's covering the hole.
We've got a slice of freshly cut Stilton, so I'm so excited to give this a try. First thing that I want to point out about this is that it's not that smelly. You know how blue cheeses have this reputation for being so smelly. It's actually alright. Oh, it's so good. It just disappeared. It just melted like that. The texture is nice and crumbly. Even if this is some sort of hard cheese, so it's not that creamy, it actually is on your palate. It has some like sweet hints at the beginning when you first taste it, and then you're left with a bit of salty aftertaste, which is incredible. I mean, you know, you get 2 different flavors in one bite. It's so good. I'm gonna have another one. The sweetness of the blue veins, so good. And also if you get a mini piece without the blue, that in itself, it's marvelous. And again, the texture is incredible, so crumbly. And it's something that I haven't had with other blue cheeses. They are kind of gummy. This one is so nice, melts in your mouth, incredible.
Stilton is a registered trademark by the Stilton Cheesemakers Association, which was founded in 1936. The trademark protects the cheese in countries including the US, Canada, and Japan. Within the EU, the cheese was also granted the protected designation of origin in 1996.
Next, we visit Cheddar in Somerset, England, where there is only one traditional cheesemaker in the village.
It's Ju, and today I'm in the West Country to show you how traditional cheddar is made. Now, although cheddar is produced in other parts of the world, the village of Cheddar is where it's from. The Cheddar Gorge Cheese Company is the only dairy in this village, so we're about to see the real deal. About 333,000 tonnes of cheddar are produced in the UK per year. To get the official Protected Designation of Origin label, West Country Farmhouse Cheddar, the cheese has to be made in one of the 4 counties: Cornwall, Devon, Somerset, Dorset. The cheese must be made from milk from grazing herds no more than 30 miles from the farm. It has to be made from a traditional recipe. the curds need to be turned by hand, and it must be aged to a minimum of 9 months. The earliest record of cheddar anywhere is at Cheddar in Somerset in 1170. The land around this village has been at the heart of English cheesemaking since the 15th century. Today, as many cheddar producers have upscaled and required more land, there is only one traditional cheesemaker left in the village. The Cheddar Gorge Cheese Company produces 60 tonnes of cheese each year.
But certainly down here you have the Somerset levels, and then you have the top of the Cheddar Gorge, and each year you would get a lot of water coming down from the gorge, bringing a lot of silt, which really made the pastures verdant and very, very nutritious.
In the morning, 2,000 litres of milk is delivered from a farm 4 miles away. It takes around 10 litres of milk to make 1 kilogram of cheddar. The milk is agitated, which mixes the fat evenly through the milk. Some farmhouse producers use pasteurised milk, but here it's raw milk.
We use it unpasteurised. We need to know that the quality of the milk and the safety is fine. The farm that we get it from has Friesian, Holstein Friesians, British Friesians.
A vegetarian replacement for rennet is then added, which sets the milk into a junket. This is cut to form curds and whey. The curds and whey are heated to about 40 degrees Celsius to make the curds solid. This influences the moisture level in the finished product. Cheeses like Gorgonzola and Mozzarella have a lot of moisture in them, so they go off very quickly, whereas Parmesan has little moisture, so lasts for a long time. Cheddar is somewhere in the middle, around 40%. The starter cultures develop and multiply. The whey is drained away. Next, the all-important cheddaring process, where the curds, now having the texture of chicken breasts, are turned and cut.
What cheddaring does is it squeezes the curd and forces more whey out of it. And gradually it'll get drier and drier, and the texture changes very quickly.
The curd is salted by hand to preserve it, and milled into small chips. It's pressed into a 25 kilogram mould and left overnight. In the morning, it's dipped in hot water to smooth the edge of the cheese and remove the imprint of the cloth. It's then treated with a vegetarian-based substance. The use of cheesecloth is a vital way of allowing the cheese to gradually dry and develop a rind. The only thing that identifies it is a tag that states the date of production and the weight of the cheese. The mellow, mature and vintage cheddars are all stored on site, where they are turned, and the free mould is vacuumed away. The cave mature variety is carried into the famous Goths Cave in the Mendip Hills. The constant temperature and humidity, nearly 98%, provide perfect conditions in which to mature cloth-bound cheese. The moisture content is a critical component, and it ensures the cultures and enzymes move on more quickly, producing a more complex flavour. It takes on the natural yeast and mould from the atmosphere in the cave, leading to an earthy flavour. The cheese's strength is defined by the length of the aging. For mellow cheddar, it's 4 to 6 months. Mature, 10 to 12 months. And vintage, 20 to 24 months. Cave matured should have less of a bite at 12 months old. We tried some out to see if there's a taste difference between the maturations. first one I'm going to have a little bite of is the cave matured cheddar. It's really creamy. It almost has the consistency of quite a medium mild cheddar. You can tell the difference of the rinds here. So I've got the cave aged one, which has sort of like that really damp, quite dark colour on the rind of it. And then I've got the vintage one, which is just a little bit lighter. Okay, now let's try some of this. Wow, the flavour of that is incredible. It has such a kick to it and such a bite. Immediately when you cut into vintage cheddar, you want there to be almost a flakiness to it, and that's exactly what this has got. The company is the first one in recent memory to reintroduce cheddar cheese back into a natural cave environment to mature. The PDO label was set up to protect the industry from non-genuine products. So why did the Cheddar Gorge Cheese Company opt out of it?
Some years ago we had PDO status for our cheese, but we deliberately opted out of it. So with the PDO you can make it from pasteurised milk. We make all ours from unpasteurised. With the PDO you can mature it in plastic. We mature ours in cloth, and we are still doing the things that would enable us to qualify for PDO. What we've just done is go on a little bit further, quite a lot further.
We end our journey in Spain, where Manchego cheese is made at a 5th-generation family farm.
Manchego cheese is made in a part of Spain that is called La Mancha, which is just south of Madrid, and today we're in Campo de Montiel, which is a region in La Mancha. We're going to visit La Granja, which is a farm here that's been doing the cheese for over 200 years.
We're going to learn about its history and making process, and find out why it is Spain's most popular cheese, as well as what makes it different from other cheeses in the world that bear the same name. Evidence of cheesemaking in La Mancha region dates to the Bronze Age. But cheese is not the only thing this region is known for. In the 17th century, novelist Miguel de Cervantes brought the region to fame, narrating the adventures of knight-errant Don Quixote de la Mancha, which is the second most translated book in the world after the Bible. Within the region, Manchego cheese is made in the provinces of Toledo, Cuenca, Ciudad Real and Albacete.
El queso manchego está muy vinculado a La Mancha. Desde que se tiene memoria se lleva elaborando queso en esta zona porque es una zona eminentemente ganadera. Siempre ha habido pastoreo y los pastores siempre han utilizado la leche de esas ovejas para hacer queso. Entonces el queso y La Mancha es una historia que ha ido unida desde que se tiene conocimiento.
Finca La Granja is a 5th-generation family farm that's been making the cheese since the 19th century.
Finca La Granja sabemos que se lleva haciendo queso desde 1830, o sea que son casi 200 años de historia en la elaboración del queso manchego. Hacemos queso todos los días, elaboramos únicamente el queso con la leche de nuestras propias ovejas que pastan en los campos de alrededor y con esa leche fresca elaboramos el queso cuando la leche no tiene aún ni 24 horas de vida. Y es un factor muy importante para nosotros porque al ser queso elaborado con leche cruda, pues transmitimos todos esos beneficios y esa seña de identidad que nos da nuestra ganadería.
The dairy makes about 65 wheels of Manchego cheese per day. The cheese is made with milk from the previous evening and morning milk that's fresh.
El proceso comienza con el filtrado de la leche, la colocamos en la cuba y el maestro quesero va jugando con el tiempo y la temperatura para cuajar esa leche. En el momento preciso la añade el cuajo y deja que cuaje hasta que él considera el punto óptimo de corte de la cuajada. Esa cuajada se corta muy sutilmente, muy despacito para que el maestro quesero consiga el momento perfecto y el grano, el tamaño y la textura perfecta en esa cuajada. Después se deposita en la mesa y se va introduciendo a mano en los moldes. Eso es muy importante porque al final es la mano del quesero la que determina cómo va a ser el queso. Se va metiendo a mano uno por uno formando cada pieza.
The mold is very important because it is what actually gives the cheese its signature pattern. It's all printed inside, and then after being placed into molds, the cheese is placed into a press. And it's pressed for about 4 hours, and after these 4 hours, it's going to be moved to brines.
Each wheel is labeled with a unique plaque of milk protein. In the past, Manchego cheese used to be shaped in these baskets, made of esparto grass.
Esta era la forma tradicional que tenían los pastores de hacer el queso. Esto se llama flor y está diseñada para permitir que el suero salga con el hierro de la finca. Y esto se llama pleita, que está hecha con esparto trenzado. Yo recuerdo a mi abuelo elaborando queso con estas pleitas. Y lo que solían hacer era poner la flor, la pleita encima, aquí ponían un paño de algodón y ese paño de algodón lo llenaban con la cuajada del queso. Luego ponían otra flor encima y la ponían en las prensas, en los entremisos.
After the wheels are taken out of the brines, they are placed in a drying room.
As you can see behind me, we have different blocks of cheese. We have just here on my right, the ones that were made just yesterday, and then going forward, we have 2 days ago, 3 days ago, 4 days ago, up until 1 month.
El moho es muy especial para nosotros, es una contaminación ambiental, es completamente natural, pero lo que hace es proteger el queso. Cuando el queso ya está cubierto de moho como este, el frío de las cámaras incide de una forma mucho más lenta. El moho ayuda a que el queso guarde humedad y sobre todo da muchísimo aroma. A mí me encanta, por ejemplo, lanzar las esporas al aire. Al final, lo que hacemos con el volteo de diario del queso es estas esporas, ¿no? Este moho lo lanzamos al aire y esas esporas van colonizando los diferentes quesos y van creciendo y se van reproduciendo. Pero bueno, al final creemos que merece la pena tener un producto tan natural como este.
Manchego cheese matures for at least 2 months. Cheese that matures from 2 to 6 months is called semicurado, and it becomes curado when the maturation exceeds 6 months.
Y lo que hacemos luego es, cuando el queso tiene 2 meses, limpiamos ese moho y damos una capa de aceite de oliva virgen en la corteza. De esa forma conseguimos nutrir la corteza del queso. El queso va a estar la corteza va a estar un poquito más suave. Frenamos un poquito que se seque, que se siga secando. Y luego, posteriormente, cuando el moho vuelva a crecer, pues crecen otras cepas con otra incidencia de moho que ya dejarán listos para ser cepillado otra vez y listos para poner a la venta.
So next to me is a 5-month-old Manchego cheese. This one is semi-hard, semi-curado, they say in Spanish. And we got some slices that Gabriela's got for us. Smells very nice. Throughout my cheese journey, I learned to become a fan of raw milk cheese. So I actually have high expectations for this one. So nice. It's very good. I like it. It's got some like tangy aftertaste. I think that is because it's been aged for more than the two months that is the minimum. It's very good. You taste the raw milk. You can taste that this comes from sheep's milk and it's not cow's milk. It has a different texture as well in your mouth. And I like it. It's somewhere in between crumbly and a bit buttery. So you get both of them depending on, when you actually bite into it and when you chew it. Again, the fact that this one has matured more than the minimum has made it better.
Despite the fact that the cheese takes its name from the Spanish region where it originated, other Spanish-speaking countries call their cheeses Manchego. So what is the difference? When the Spanish conquistadors landed in Mexico, they brought with them the art of cheesemaking, Manchego cheese included. Today, Mexican Manchego shares very little with its Spanish namesake, as it is made with cow's milk and is usually matured for a shorter time. But Spanish cheesemakers are not happy to share their cheese's name with others. Within the EU, Spanish Manchego cheese is protected by the Protected Designation of Origin status, which prevents cheeses not from La Mancha from being called Manchego. In April 2018, a new trade deal with Mexico granted the EU exclusive rights for 340 products with a geographical indication, but excluded Spanish Manchego. So at this stage, the two cheeses coexist, and the row is sure to be continued.